What if the royal family just made Meghan Markle disappear, digitally, completely, and without saying a single word? In a move that stunned even her closest advisors, Meghan Markle has been abruptly erased from the official royal website. No warning, no explanation, just gone. Behind the scenes, royal insiders say this wasn't a technical update, it was a message. Tonight, we uncover the chilling strategy behind this silent purge, how Meghan found out, and why the palace's silence may be more brutal than any public statement. Is this the final exile, or just the beginning of something far darker? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The digital era was still when it happened. No formal statement, no royal press release, not even a subtle whisper from Buckingham Palace's usual mouthpieces. Yet, what occurred in the quiet dark of the early morning hours sent shockwaves across 2 continents. The palace's official website, a carefully curated and constantly monitored archive of royal dignity and hierarchy, had undergone a subtle but seismic transformation. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, the media's sensation, the woman who once held hands with Queen Elizabeth at official functions, was gone. Vanished. Not a single trace of her biography, charitable affiliations, or photos with the royal family remained. Her page had been stripped bare, as if she had never existed within the structure of the crown. For royal watchers and insiders, this wasn't just a digital update, it was a digital execution. In the modern monarchy, presence on the website is not just symbolic, it is official recognition. And Meghan's disappearance from it marked something far more calculated, far more ruthless, and far more permanent than any tabloid headline could suggest. This was not an accident, and Meghan knew it. When the first reports trickled in from palace IT monitors and royal correspondents, many initially thought it was a website glitch. After all, errors happen. Content disappears and reappears. Perhaps they were simply refreshing her biography. Perhaps a correction was being made. But when hours passed, then days, with no clarification from Buckingham Palace, no outreach from royal communications, and most importantly, no reappearance of Meghan's name or image, the truth became inescapable. This was a purge. And the most shocking part? Meghan Markle was reportedly blindsided. Sources close to her inner circle say she discovered the update not from a briefing, not from Harry, and not from palace intermediaries, but from a flood of messages sent to her team. Screenshots pouring in from journalists and followers asking the same chilling question. Why is she no longer on the site? Panic set in. Lawyers were contacted. Publicists scrambled. Within Meghan's Montecito estate, the mood shifted from confidence to chaos in an instant. The Duchess, who had so carefully constructed a post-royal brand built on independence, media savvy, and strategic control, suddenly found herself cornered by the very institution she thought she'd walked away from. The irony was brutal. She had left the palace physically, but it was the palace, in its cold silence and calculated deletion, that had now erased her. And the deletion wasn't symbolic. It was deliberate. Royal insiders later confirmed what many had suspected. This was not part of a routine web redesign. This was a direct command, traced back to high-level royal aides and, reportedly, signed off on by King Charles himself. After years of tension, scandal, and what some within the firm call repeated betrayals, it appeared the monarchy had finally closed the door. No more compromise. No more halfway associations. No more working non-working royals. Meghan Markle was officially, undeniably, and irrevocably gone. But what does that mean in real terms? In a monarchy obsessed with optics, history, and tradition, the royal website functions as both a symbolic record and a living document. It's where the public turns to understand who stands where in the royal order, who's rising, who's fading, and who's been cast out. To be removed from this record is to be erased from royal history itself. And yet, this wasn't just a story about HTML and image files. It was the final shot in a Cold War that had been simmering beneath the surface since Meghan and Harry's explosive departure from royal life in 2020. From the tell-all Oprah interview to the release of Harry's memoir and the relentless drip of Netflix documentaries and podcast revelations, the palace had remained mostly silent. Until now. This silence was never weakness. It was strategy. And now, it had reached its culmination. Sources say this digital move came after weeks of internal debate. King Charles, long caught between his loyalty to his son and his duty to the crown, had allegedly grown weary of the endless scandals that followed Meghan's name. Advisors close to the king described this as an inevitable evolution of the firm's direction, moving forward with a streamlined, scandal-free brand of monarchy as the new reign matures. One insider put it bluntly, there is no place for chaos on a website meant to represent stability. But there's another layer here, one that makes this act even more chilling. Because unlike formal exile or public disavowal, this deletion came without warning or explanation. It was a surgical move, executed in silence. No scandal broke the day before. No new leak preceded it. Meghan hadn't released a new documentary. There was no fresh tell-all. And that's exactly what makes it so powerful. The palace waited for a moment when no one was looking. And then, with one keystroke, it ended the chapter. For Meghan, this was not only a personal blow, it was a public humiliation. Every media outlet from London to Los Angeles picked up the story. The headlines varied in tone, some gleeful, others critical, but they all shared one message: she had been erased. Worse, the public reaction was split. Some called it petty, others called it justice. But what few acknowledged outright is that this act was not merely a closing of a door, it was a message. To Meghan, to Harry, and to the world. The monarchy may be slow, it may be quiet, but it does not forget. For many, the question now is, why now? Why did the palace wait nearly 4 years after Meghan's official step back from royal duties to make this move? Why not do it after the Oprah interview? Or after Harry's memoir? Or after the Spotify deal collapsed? What changed now? That's the question this video is going to unpack. Because beneath this headline lies a maze of whispers, strategic maneuvering, secret meetings, and one overarching truth: the firm plays a long game. And they never act until they know the moment is right. In the chapters that follow, we will explore the timing, the aftermath, and the deeply buried motivations behind this purge. You'll hear what Harry reportedly said behind closed doors when he found out. You'll see how Meghan's team attempted to retaliate. And you'll uncover why this isn't just a website change, it's the first step in a much larger campaign. We'll also examine how this single deletion has sent tremors across Meghan's business empire, reshaping her public image, influencing contract negotiations, and sending corporate sponsors scrambling to reevaluate. But more than all of that, we'll explore what this means for the future of the monarchy. Is this King Charles finally drawing a red line? Is this Prince William's influence in play? And is there any way back now for Meghan Markle? Because once the palace decides you no longer exist, do you? This is the story of how one woman went from duchess to deleted. Not with noise, not with drama, but with the cold, brutal quiet of a system that never needed her name to begin with. And if you thought Meghan's battle with the monarchy was over, you haven't seen anything yet. Let's begin. It began as a routine check. A royal historian, cataloging biographies for a comparative review on senior versus junior members of the monarchy, logged onto the official royal.uk site just before dawn. What they found was not routine at all. There, under the Members of the Royal Family tab, Meghan Markle's name was no longer listed. Not even under the extended family. Gone. The bio that once boasted her titles, wedding details, and charities she had briefly supported was wiped clean. The links were dead. The images, once carefully selected from public appearances and Commonwealth tours, had vanished. It was as if someone had gone through the back end of the site and scrubbed it pixel by pixel. At first, some speculated it was a temporary technical glitch. But glitches don't delete entire biographies without a trace. And they certainly don't do it without affecting other pages. Meghan's was the only one altered. Every other profile, from Camilla to Zara Tindall, remained intact. What made this move even more suspicious was that this deletion occurred without a formal update or explanation. In the past, when Prince Philip passed away, his page was respectfully transitioned. When Queen Elizabeth II died, the site was updated with national mourning banners and tributes. When William and Kate became the Prince and Princess of Wales, updates were made with celebratory clarity. The royal website has always been a tool of silent but clear communication. A digital announcement board for the monarchy's shifting dynamics. Yet in this case, the palace offered no banner, no press statement, no due to recent updates clause. Just silence. The deletion was clinical, deliberate, strategic. To understand the impact of this, we have to understand what the royal website really is. It's more than just an informational platform. It's a curated archive that defines royal hierarchy, presence, and status. It serves journalists, researchers, and the public. It's indexed by search engines, quoted in official reports, and cited in publications around the world. In short, being listed on royal.uk is the digital equivalent of being recognized as a functioning limb of the monarchy. and being removed is the clearest sign that the crown no longer acknowledges your place in that body. But how did the public start to notice? It began on royal forums and Twitter. A few early risers posted side-by-side screenshots. One from a few weeks earlier and the current version. The absence was clear. People didn't just notice the change, they were rattled by it. News outlets began to pick up the trail. Within hours, the Daily Mail had a headline questioning the disappearance. Sky News followed. Then American outlets like Page 6 and People began contacting royal sources for confirmation. By mid-afternoon, the palace still had not responded. But behind the scenes, insiders say phones were ringing nonstop. Multiple anonymous aides have since confirmed that the decision to erase Meghan's digital presence was made 2 weeks before the update went live. It was timed, reviewed, approved in person. A small digital team was tasked with making the transition early in the morning before UK traffic on the website peaked. They coordinated with the press office but were under strict orders. No leaks, no previews, no external communication. The instruction was simple: let the public notice it themselves. Why take this approach? Because the monarchy wanted to send a message without engaging in a media brawl. In the past, every time the palace released a statement involving Meghan and Harry, it triggered a PR war. Press statements would be countered with interviews. Articles would be met with legal threats. But by simply deleting her, they flipped the script. They made Meghan react. They forced her to play defense. This wasn't just about optics. This was psychological. And make no mistake, the people inside the firm understand narrative warfare. They have dealt with press manipulation, media storms, and internal family leaks for generations. What the public sees as polite silence is often a chess game happening in shadows. By choosing to move digitally rather than publicly, they avoided adding fuel to the fire and stripped Meghan of a clear enemy to target. There was no headline to scream about, no royal spokesperson to accuse, no formal quote to twist, just absence. And in public relations, silence, when used correctly, is devastating. Meanwhile, Meghan's team scrambled. According to internal leaks from Montecito's staff, there was immediate confusion. Her press office wasn't given any heads up. They discovered the deletion at the same time as everyone else. Screenshots were forwarded around. Calls were made to the palace's digital communications office, which reportedly refused to offer comment. The only answer they received was chilling in its simplicity. Content updated under the direction of Royal Senior Administration. That's it. No apology. No negotiation. No notice. In response, Meghan's team tried to control the damage. An anonymous source close to the Duchess was quoted in several friendly publications as being disappointed by the palace's lack of transparency. Privately, though, the mood was far more furious. And behind the fury? Fear. Because the deletion had deeper implications. First, this changed how Meghan's legacy within the monarchy is viewed by future generations. If a curious historian, a child learning about royal life, or a student of media and power were to look her up on the royal website now, they'd find nothing. No formal record of her role. No reference to her wedding, her brief duties, or even her children. Only mentions of Harry, indirectly, through association with other pages. But her name? It had been filtered out entirely. Second, this changed her ability to leverage her past titles. Many of her deals, media, fashion, speaking engagements, have subtly leaned on the cachet of being a duchess. She may have stepped back from official duties, but she has never publicly renounced the title. Nor has the palace revoked it. But now, with her name removed from all official documentation, it becomes harder to defend any claim to active royal relevance. It becomes harder to pitch shows, sell products, or negotiate from a place of symbolic power. Third, and perhaps most concerning for Meghan, is the timing. Just days prior, reports had emerged that her team was in preliminary talks with a major streaming platform about a follow-up documentary centered on royal injustice. According to insiders, the palace had caught wind of the project. They weren't pleased, and some believe this deletion may have been a preemptive strike. If Meghan was planning to use her connection to the royal family as a narrative foundation again, the monarchy had made its position clear. You're not one of us anymore. Not officially, not digitally, not symbolically. And what made this truly brutal was that the palace didn't need to say a word. They didn't need to justify their action to the press. They didn't need to worry about backlash from public sentiment, because they understood that a lack of attention, when backed by total authority, is louder than protest. So where does this leave Meghan? Publicly humiliated. Institutionally exiled. Legally in limbo. Her lawyers have reportedly begun a quiet investigation into whether such a deletion carries implications for the legitimacy of her titles, her name usage, and her personal brand. But the palace has closed its gates. They've moved on. And that's perhaps the cruelest part of all. For years, Meghan tried to distance herself from the monarchy while still benefiting from its prestige. But now, with one calculated move, the monarchy has distanced itself from her. The silence is deafening. And it's only just begun. The sun had just begun to rise over Montecito when the first alert came through. Meghan Markle, known for starting her day early with meditation, inbox checks, and scheduled calls to her PR team, was already awake and going through a stack of digital reports. Her mornings were rarely quiet. Between monitoring news coverage, managing Archwell Foundation planning, and coordinating with her agents, her schedule had become a finely tuned operation of reputation management and image control. But no amount of routine could prepare her for the firestorm that would ignite before breakfast. It started with a single message. A junior publicist in London forwarded an email thread from a journalist working at a reputable British tabloid. The subject line read, "Request for comment. Meghan Markle page removed from royal.uk." At first, Meghan skimmed past it, assuming it was just another headline grab. But then another email followed, and another, all asking the same question. Why had Meghan's name, biography, and image been scrubbed from the official royal family website? She froze. That moment of uncertainty, the pause before panic, was brief but unforgettable. Her hands hovered over her phone. Her eyes scanned the messages again. She immediately summoned her head of communications, insisting on a screen share and a direct look at the site. Within minutes, Meghan and her top aides were staring at the live version of royal.uk. There was nothing. No profile. No title under the Duchess of Sussex. No archive gallery. No trace of her work with patronages that had once been proudly listed. Not even a line noting her marriage to Prince Harry. It was as if she had never existed. Meghan's face, according to those present, changed instantly. The air in the room thickened. Her expression went from disbelief to rage in seconds. Gone was the polished exterior of the poised Duchess. In its place emerged something raw, unfiltered, and deeply shaken. For someone as media-savvy as Meghan, who had built a career on controlling narratives, this was the equivalent of a bomb detonating at her feet. She had learned to anticipate public attacks, smear campaigns, and character assassinations. But this was different. This was institutional. It came not from a faceless troll or sensationalist reporter, but from the source of royal truth itself. The palace. And worse still, she had received no warning. She immediately demanded an internal review. Had they missed a memo? Was there a letter from the palace that had been overlooked? Had anyone at all, given them the heads up that something like this might be coming? Silence. No one knew. No one saw it coming. Panic began to settle in. Behind closed doors, Meghan's voice raised in sharp frustration. Her team scrambled to piece together what they could. Calls were made to friendly journalists. They confirmed the change was real. Social media had caught wind of it, and hashtag Meghan removed and hashtag royal website purge were already trending in multiple countries. Harry, still in another wing of the estate, was alerted immediately. He reportedly walked into the room with his phone in hand, brows furrowed, already aware something was wrong. When he saw the website for himself, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. Unlike Meghan, he wasn't surprised, but he was clearly upset. Meghan, however, was devastated. For her, this wasn't just about the optics. This was about identity. It was about legacy. She had spent years defending her position as a royal, even as she and Harry stepped away from active duties. She hadn't relinquished her title. She hadn't asked to be removed. In her eyes, she was still the Duchess of Sussex, and she had continued to use that title in public-facing work, official correspondence, and brand negotiations. Now, that identity had been stripped from her by the very institution she once tried to work within. Her mind went to the children. If her name was removed, what did that mean for Archie and Lilibet? Would they be next? Would their names be quietly deleted too? Would their titles be revoked in the same silent fashion? She reportedly asked those questions aloud, not to anyone in particular, but to the room itself, her voice shaking not with sadness, but with fury. The symbolic weight of this deletion was immense. It wasn't just digital housekeeping, it was a statement. a public declaration that the firm no longer recognized her as part of the royal ecosystem. Behind the scenes, her lawyers were contacted immediately. They were instructed to determine whether this deletion carried any legal implications. Could it be challenged? Was it a breach of some prior agreement? Was this even permissible under British constitutional precedent? The legal team's response was not comforting. Technically, the royal family has full editorial control over its website. It is not beholden to outside parties. It is not governed by media law in the traditional sense. It is an institutional channel representing the monarchy's internal communications and public-facing identity. Therefore, the removal of Meghan's page was entirely within the Crown's discretion. Meghan was stunned. There was no recourse, no appeal, no legal requirement to notify her beforehand, no obligation to explain the decision. And for someone who had built her life around narratives, who had sold millions of dollars in content deals based on her royal affiliation, this deletion threatened the very foundation of her post-palace brand. In a flurry of action, her PR team began working on a counter-strategy. Should they release a statement condemning the palace's decision? Should Meghan grant an interview? Should they leak behind-the-scenes details of her past work with the Queen to remind the public of her service? But Harry advised caution. He reportedly told Meghan that reacting impulsively would only give the palace what it wanted, more fodder to cast them as combative, ungrateful, and self-centered. He urged her to let it play out, at least for a day or two, before making any public move. Meghan, visibly seething, reluctantly agreed. But privately, the damage was already done. According to Montecito insiders, Meghan didn't speak to anyone for several hours that day beyond her inner circle. She canceled a scheduled video call with a corporate partner. She skipped her afternoon yoga session. For someone who thrived on rhythm, productivity, and control, this disruption wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. The incident brought back memories of past slights. The cold reception she had received at her last royal event. The perceived snubs from palace aides. The whispered criticisms of her protocol missteps. But this felt different. This felt final. The deletion wasn't just about pushing her aside. It was about rewriting history, removing her chapter from the royal book entirely. And it wasn't just Meghan who noticed. The media exploded with commentary. Some saw the move as overdue. Others viewed it as a vindictive erasure. But what everyone agreed on was this. Meghan had been targeted with surgical precision. The silence from the palace only made it worse. There was no clarification, no statement of intent. Not a single spokesperson came forward to explain the rationale. This was not a PR mistake. This was not an accident. This was a decision. And that decision was to remove Meghan Markle from the royal record. Back in Montecito, Meghan stared at her laptop screen long after the meeting ended. The image of the website, blank where her name once appeared, stayed fixed in her mind. It was more than just a page. It was the symbolic confirmation of something she had long feared. No matter how many interviews she gave, no matter how many documentaries she produced, and no matter how global her fame became, she was no longer part of the story. Not the story that mattered in the palace. Not the one that gets archived. And perhaps that was the firm's plan all along. To wait until the world stopped watching. To move not in retaliation, but in silence. Not to embarrass her, but to forget her. Inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, where polished portraits of monarchs past line the corridors and discretion is measured with a steel ruler, silence isn't just a habit, it's a weapon. And in the days following Meghan Markle's sudden deletion from the official royal website, that silence rang louder than any press conference ever could. No statement. No email to the press. No technical update explanation. And yet, behind that curtain of royal restraint, sources say the decision to erase Meghan Markle from the Royal Digital Archive was anything but spontaneous. It was discussed, reviewed, endorsed, by people who understood exactly what message would be sent and what it would cost if the move was interpreted as spiteful or reactionary. This was not the result of oversight. This was the culmination of calculated strategy. But why now? To understand what the palace isn't saying publicly, one has to go back months, perhaps even a year, to a series of increasingly tense developments. Meghan and Harry had not only exited royal life, but they had begun to craft their own quasi-royal universe, one where they dictated their roles, their titles, and their narratives. From multi-million-dollar media deals to public speaking engagements steeped in noble themes like mental health and equality, the couple had built a brand around the phrase, "Service is universal." The implication was loud and clear. they didn't need the crown to lead. But while Harry may still be tethered to the monarchy through birthright, Meghan was always an outsider. And in the eyes of the palace, that status came with limits, especially once she started invoking her royal past in commercial ventures. Inside royal communications meetings, advisors began expressing growing concern. Meghan's continued use of the Duchess of Sussex title in promotional materials, podcast introductions, and business endeavors was seen as problematic. While technically still valid, given she had not been formally stripped of it, the optics were troubling. To many senior aides, it looked like she was trading on a title earned through marriage to advance personal ambitions, without fulfilling any of the responsibilities that once justified it. The palace couldn't publicly reprimand her without reigniting the war, but it could take back its recognition. This is where the strategy began. According to high-level insiders, King Charles, Queen Camilla, and Prince William had several private meetings over the course of late spring. The topic? The long-term public image of the monarchy under Charles's reign. In each discussion, Meghan's name came up, not as a member of the family, but as a branding issue, a disruption, a liability. The king, ever cautious about appearing petty, was initially hesitant. He understood the global attention that followed any move involving Meghan and Harry. But aides presented a compelling argument. Meghan's page was no longer accurate. She no longer undertook royal duties, and continued inclusion muddied the palace's messaging about who counted as a working royal. One insider reportedly put it bluntly, "We are in a new era. If we are going to ask the public to respect and support the institution, we must show that we respect its values. This includes being clear about who represents us and who does not." That argument stuck. Sources say it was Prince William who finally tipped the scale. While Charles remained the figurehead of diplomacy, William has taken a more active role in modernizing the monarchy. He has long been frustrated with the perception that the Sussexes could operate with impunity while the palace remained silent. He pushed for the website update not as punishment, but as clarification. The public, he argued, deserved clarity, and the crown deserved control. The palace never intended to make a grand announcement. They knew the act itself would speak volumes. In fact, they understood that the media would discover it, dissect it, and report on it, doing the work for them. By staying silent, they retained the moral high ground and allowed speculation to swirl without giving fuel to retaliation. But what the palace isn't admitting is that this wasn't just about website architecture. It was about legacy. The firm has always been meticulous about documentation. Every page on royal.uk reflects years of curated history. Even minor family members like the Duke of Kent retain their space, despite holding far less relevance than Meghan. So to remove a figure who held global attention for years, a woman who married into the family in a spectacle broadcast to hundreds of millions, was not a small act. It was institutional amputation. Yet the palace chose to remain publicly indifferent. That indifference hides something deeper, the recognition that any public back and forth with Meghan would be a disaster. The memory of the Oprah interview is still raw. The wounds from Harry's memoir still fresh. The palace doesn't want another media war. They want quiet resolution. They want history to turn the page without headlines screaming in protest. By removing Meghan's page without comment, they ensured that she would be the one to react, that her team would be the one scrambling for a narrative, that every headline about her absence would originate from outside the palace walls, not from within. Strategically, it's brilliant. Ethically, it's controversial. And yet, what the palace still refuses to confront publicly is the emotional toll of their silence. This isn't just about protocol, it's about a person. Someone who, however divisive, still gave birth to a royal child. Someone who still married into the crown. Someone who, for better or worse, changed the public perception of the royal family forever. And by pretending she no longer exists, the palace raises a dangerous question. What happens to those who challenge the system from within? The answer, it seems, is deletion. But there are risks to this silence. Already, commentators are calling the move cowardly. Others are pointing out the hypocrisy, keeping the profiles of scandal-touched royals like Prince Andrew while deleting Meghan's without explanation. The optics aren't universally clean. Moreover, this opens the door for Meghan to reframe the narrative once again. Already, her allies have begun planting seeds in media outlets that this was an act of revenge, of xenophobia, of institutional insecurity. The palace, by remaining silent, forfeits the chance to shape the counter-narrative. And yet, the gamble is clear. In their eyes, engaging would only escalate. Remaining silent allows the story to burn out on its own. But beneath that surface calm, there is tension. Among the staff, among the press officers, among the courtiers who know this isn't over. Because what the palace won't say publicly is what they fear privately. Meghan is not someone who stays quiet when slighted. And this move may have sparked a response they can't control. The deletion, in the palace's view, was the end of Meghan's chapter. But for Meghan, it may only be the beginning of a new volume. One with its own headlines, interviews, and behind-the-scenes footage. The weight of silence pressed down on the Montecito estate like an invisible storm cloud. Hours after the news of Meghan's deletion from the royal website had gone viral, Prince Harry remained mostly unseen by his household staff. He wasn't taking calls. He hadn't made an appearance in the kitchen, nor was he spotted in his usual morning walk route that winds along the secluded hedges behind their California mansion. But behind the stone walls and privacy fences, he wasn't resting. He was reeling. Those closest to him knew something had shifted. Harry had spent years walking the impossible tightrope between loyalty to the woman he loved and the institution he had fled. But now, for perhaps the first time, the rope had snapped. The very system that raised him had drawn a final, unmistakable line, and they had done it without even consulting him. His wife had been digitally erased, and with her, so too had a part of him. The moment he first saw the website, he said almost nothing. Meghan had already been pacing, furiously rereading the media reports and refreshing the royal UK homepage in disbelief. When Harry joined her and sat at the corner of the oak dining table, he looked like someone absorbing a quiet betrayal. He scrolled through his phone without speaking, reloaded the website a few times, then placed the phone face down. He didn't shout. He didn't storm out. But you could see it, said a staff member later that day. It was like the air went out of him. Not rage. Not even shock. Just that deep kind of disappointment that hits you in the chest. That disappointment wasn't just about Meghan's removal. It was about the message behind it. To understand Harry's emotional state, one has to understand the complicated legacy he carries. For decades, he had been the spare, the younger son living in the long shadow of a future king. For years, he played the mischievous prince, the one who rebelled, who drank too much at Eton, who wore a Nazi costume at a party and faced global condemnation. But even through the scandals, the palace had always shielded him. Until Meghan. She had been the line in the sand. Since their marriage, Harry had watched the institution he was born into grow increasingly cold. His request for protection, his complaints about media harassment, his appeals for mental health support, all of it, in his view, was met with resistance or outright dismissal. The royal family's public posture may have been courteous, but behind the scenes, Harry had begun to feel like a stranger in his own lineage. Now, the removal of Meghan's name confirmed what he had feared since their infamous departure in 2020, that his family no longer saw him as one of them, not truly. They tolerated him, yes, but they no longer trusted him. And in removing his wife, they had made their intentions perfectly clear. There would be no reconciliation, no invitation back, no shared legacy. They weren't just deleting Meghan. They were deleting any version of the monarchy that included Harry outside the lines. Later that evening, Harry retreated to his private office, a converted library filled with shelves of military memorabilia, photographs of his mother, and personal letters he had collected over the years. There, in the quiet, he called a friend from his military days, someone he could trust. The call lasted less than 20 minutes, but its content, according to sources familiar with the exchange, was emotionally charged. He reportedly said, "I should have known they'd do it. They've been waiting for the chance. They just needed it to look clean." His friend asked if he'd confront them, maybe call Charles directly, or William. Harry reportedly said, "What's the point? They've made it clear I don't belong." And yet, that wasn't entirely true. Harry did still belong. His name, after all, still appears on the royal site. His titles remain intact, as do his designations as the Duke of Sussex and patron of several military charities. But that's precisely what made the removal of Meghan so painful. It was personal. Selective. It wasn't about policy, it was about her. Harry, those close to him say, took it as an act of war by omission. He spent the next morning alone, walking the trails behind their property, headphones in his ears, replaying audio memos and news commentary. Meghan remained inside, working with her legal team. She wanted a public explanation. Harry, however, was unsure. He had once believed that the family would, at some point, come around. that maybe after time had passed and the rage had cooled, he and Meghan might be able to find a path forward with his father. But now, that illusion had been shattered. For a man whose entire childhood had been defined by the ripple effects of silence, the death of his mother, the press machine, the protocol of grief, the palace's refusal to even acknowledge what they had done felt like the ultimate act of cruelty. But he also knew what retaliation would mean. If Meghan issued a statement, or if he gave another interview, it would set off another media storm. Headlines would multiply. The firm would close ranks. And the door, which already seemed bolted shut, would be welded with iron. So he remained quiet, outwardly. Inwardly, though, Harry wrestled with guilt. Some close to him said he questioned whether leaving the royal family had been the right move. Not in terms of personal happiness or freedom, those things, he believed, were undeniable, but in terms of protection, structure, stability. He had once promised Meghan that marrying him would be the beginning of something powerful, safe, and eternal. But now, it felt like all the threads of that promise had been severed. Worse still, he couldn't shield her from the hurt. Not this time. Not when the institution acting against her was his own family. And for Harry, that reality hurt more than anything else. At dinner that night, their usual family rhythm was off. Archie asked about something he saw on a tablet earlier in the day. He had clicked into a cartoon video, but a thumbnail of Meghan had popped up on a news site beneath it. He pointed to it and said, "That's Mummy." Harry didn't react. Meghan forced a smile, changed the subject, and helped him with his pasta. But Harry later told a friend in a message that evening, "They've made her into a ghost. And one day my children will ask why." It's that thought that weighed most heavily on him in the days that followed. Not just the public perception or the media firestorm, but the long-term legacy, the history books, the future documentaries, the encyclopedias and websites that his kids would one day search for school projects or personal curiosity. Meghan's name would not be listed there. Her contribution, however controversial, had been edited out. To Harry, that wasn't just a loss of respect. It was the loss of truth. Behind closed doors, the Sussex team continued debating a response. Some advisors believed silence would make them look weak. Others argued that the palace wanted them to lash out, to become angry, bitter, defensive, so they could continue shaping the narrative of Harry and Meghan as the disgruntled outsiders. But Harry insisted they wait. For now, what the world couldn't see, was the storm inside Harry's heart. The storm of a son caught between a throne and a marriage. A father questioning what legacy he could offer his children. A prince no longer welcome in his kingdom. The storm of a man who once believed he could keep his two worlds separate, only to find out they were never truly his to divide. And so, behind closed doors, Harry stayed silent. But not still. Because while he didn't respond with words, not yet, something in him had shifted. And it would only be a matter of time before that shift made its way into the public eye. The morning after the website scandal broke, Meghan Markle sat on the edge of her plush linen bed in the Montecito mansion, staring out the window, but not really seeing what was outside. The ocean breeze that usually calmed her nerves no longer held the same charm. Her face was drawn, her phone sat idle beside her. In the world of celebrity, optics are oxygen. And right now, Meghan's public image, carefully curated over the past several years, was suffocating. The news of her erasure from the official royal website had gone from British gossip to international headline in less than 12 hours. Social media was ablaze. News anchors were dissecting the possible meaning. Commentators weighed in. Meghan Markle was no longer just a woman at odds with the monarchy, she was now its erased memory. To a woman who understood brand management as instinctively as breathing, this was nothing short of an existential crisis. But Meghan did not freeze. She strategized. The first crisis meeting happened just after sunrise, conducted around the long glass dining table in her home, with her most trusted advisors, PR strategists, lawyers, content consultants, and a few creative leads from Archwell. There was no time for tears or self-pity. She was angry, controlled, sharp, and unwaveringly focused. "We need to pivot the story," she said firmly. And in Meghan's world, a pivot didn't mean playing victim. It meant regaining the narrative. It meant visibility. It meant reminding the world that she was still here and still relevant. One of the first steps? A visual statement. Meghan had always understood the silent power of imagery. What you wear, how you look, where you're seen, it all speaks volumes before a word is uttered. Within 24 hours, she was photographed exiting a high-end wellness center in Santa Barbara, clad in a neutral-toned, form-fitting outfit, her head held high, sunglasses firmly in place. The paparazzi hadn't just caught her, they had been tipped off. It wasn't a coincidence. The photos spread quickly. Fashion blogs gushed about her post-scandal glow. Lifestyle sites speculated on her unbothered energy. It was calculated, but it was necessary. She wasn't going to cower in the shadows while the palace's digital erasure dominated headlines. Next came the message management. Behind the scenes, Meghan's team quietly activated sympathetic contacts in the U.S. media landscape. Reporters known to be friendly to her perspective received brief, unattributed updates that Meghan had been blindsided, that no prior warning was given, that she was disappointed but focused on the future. These soft launches allowed her to plant seeds of the story without appearing confrontational. Simultaneously, her publicist pitched exclusive angles to a major U.S. magazine, possibly a cover story. The theme: resilience. Reinvention. Meghan, the mother. Meghan, the activist. Meghan, the future of conscious celebrity. A woman who had walked away from an institution that could not accept her, only to build a platform that no one could take from her. But perhaps the boldest move was what came next. A proposed Archwell video campaign that had been quietly in development for months was suddenly fast-tracked. The video, originally scheduled for a fall release, would highlight Meghan's philanthropic work with underprivileged mothers and girls in underserved areas of Los Angeles. Now, it would serve a dual purpose: to reinforce her commitment to service and to counter the narrative that the palace was trying to wipe her away. The editing team was pulled into emergency meetings. Clips were reshuffled. Meghan's voiceovers were re-recorded to sound more personal, more urgent. Her wardrobe in the video, a simple white blouse, jeans, and bare face, was chosen to reflect humility and grit. The campaign tagline? "You can remove my name, but not my purpose." It was subtle, but not too subtle. The message was loud and clear. Her media strategists also floated the idea of doing a podcast episode, perhaps even reviving her shelved Spotify brand, with an episode titled "Silence Isn't Always Golden." Though she hadn't committed to it, the idea sat on the table like a loaded weapon, one she could pull if the palace retaliated, or if public opinion began to sour again. And yet, as all these plans were being drawn up, there was a persistent undercurrent of worry among her advisors. Some were privately anxious. They had seen this play out before. Meghan strikes. The press responds. The palace retreats into dignified silence. The public turns on her for appearing loud, entitled, or bitter. It was a pattern, and they feared this might be no different. Meghan, however, believed this time was different. "They want to write me out," she told her inner circle. "I won't let them." It wasn't just about a website. It was about legacy. Her children's legacy. Her own. She refused to be the footnote they hoped she'd become. But there was another side to her, a more vulnerable one, that surfaced in private. One staff member, speaking on condition of anonymity, recalled Meghan stepping away from a media strategy session, retreating to her bedroom for nearly an hour, and emerging visibly shaken. She didn't say much. But in that brief moment, it was clear that beneath the polished PR tactics and defiant headlines, Meghan was hurt. Deeply. Not by the public reaction, but by the family that had once called her one of their own. The rejection stung. And so, as her team prepared for the next wave of visibility, appearances, interviews, social media boosts, Meghan made one final move. A direct outreach to a global women's summit set for later in the year. She had been hesitant to appear before. Now, she requested a prime speaking slot. Not just to talk about gender rights, but to talk about silence. About institutions. About what it means to be erased, not just from systems, but from stories. This wasn't just PR. It was personal. And the stakes were higher than ever. Because for Meghan Markle, staying relevant wasn't just about headlines or followers. It was about not letting the monarchy control the final word. It was about holding space in a narrative that was designed to shrink her out of it. So she moved forward, calculated, controlled, composed. And she made sure that when the world Googled her name, the first thing they'd see wouldn't be the absence on royal.uk, but the headlines she made after. The deletion of Meghan Markle from the royal website wasn't random, nor was it a delayed response to old drama. It was, by all insider accounts, a premeditated reaction to a series of events that unfolded in quiet corridors, confidential meetings, and clandestine exchanges across both continents. The world saw a vanished webpage, but behind the scenes, what led to that digital disappearance was a storm of mistrust, maneuvering, and final straw moments. The question everyone asked was, why now? The most accepted theory in public discourse is that this purge was symbolic, an overdue cleansing of outdated names from a digital archive. But according to palace sources, that's not only incorrect, it's dangerously naive. The timing, language, and silence surrounding the update were anything but bureaucratic. They were strategic. The palace didn't just erase Meghan because she was no longer a working royal. They erased her because of what she was about to do. Several weeks before the purge, murmurs began reaching Kensington and Clarence House, rumors that Meghan's legal team had quietly secured a preliminary deal with a US-based production company for a new limited documentary series. Unlike her earlier projects with Netflix, this new endeavor, insiders claim, was designed to explore systemic injustice within elite institutions, including, but not limited to, the British monarchy. The pitch was subtle. It would not name names. It would feature interviews with scholars, journalists, and former insiders. But make no mistake, the blueprint was there. Meghan would build the case using symbolism, indirect anecdotes, and emotionally framed storytelling. It was to be a cultural critique. But make no mistake, the subtext was royal. Word of this plan didn't come through official channels. It came through backdoor whispers, media liaisons, high-level legal consultants, and one major investor tied to the streaming platform in question who had previously donated to royal charities. They were concerned, and they were loyal to the crown. By the time the whispers reached Queen Camilla and King Charles, the red flags were already waving. Then came the second trigger, Meghan's recent calls to two organizations she had previously patronized while under the royal umbrella. According to insiders, she had reached out to former contacts within SmartWorks and Mayhew, both charities she had championed during her time as a working royal, asking if they would be open to repartnering on a future initiative focused on global maternal health. On the surface, the request seemed harmless. But within the palace, it raised serious alarms. Why? Because it signaled that Meghan may have been planning to rebrand herself, again, under the guise of humanitarian work, while subtly invoking her past royal associations. This wasn't just a private citizen doing good work. This was a former duchess, still using her royal-era alliances to build credibility for new media moves. It was a red line. Royal protocol forbids former working royals from using their past affiliations to build new projects unless explicit approval is given. And Meghan hadn't asked for permission. She didn't intend to. As far as she was concerned, she had earned those relationships through authentic engagement. But as far as the palace was concerned, they were on borrowed time, and the lease had expired. In another revealing move, a draft proposal from Archewell's strategic team was accidentally shared with a potential corporate sponsor and leaked to a royal-affiliated contact. The document, reviewed confidentially by a senior palace aide, outlined a 2025 global visibility campaign for women in leadership and included a section on symbolic royalty. That section contained language suggesting Meghan would reclaim her place in the historical timeline of 21st century monarchy, a phrase the palace read as a direct challenge to their control over the official narrative. The aide who received the document didn't hesitate. It was sent to Buckingham Palace's private communications team within the hour. That was when the deletion discussions began in earnest. Contrary to public belief, the decision wasn't led by Charles alone. It was a joint initiative, orchestrated with input from several arms of the royal institution, the digital operations team, legal advisors, the press office, and crucially Prince William's communications director, who had long urged a firmer stance toward Harry and Meghan. William's perspective, according to those close to him, had hardened. In his view, the monarchy had shown patience too much. In fact, they had allowed the Oprah interview to go unchallenged. They had weathered Harry's memoir without a public response. And now, they were watching Meghan lay the groundwork for yet another narrative assault disguised as activism. To William, it wasn't just an optics issue, it was a threat to the very institution he was destined to lead. One royal historian close to palace affairs said, "What the public doesn't understand is that this wasn't personal. It was structural. The monarchy is an ancient institution that thrives on precedent, protocol, and predictability. Meghan, for all her charisma and popularity, represented disruption. The firm doesn't reward disruption. It quarantines it." Once the decision was made, implementation moved quickly. Meghan's digital file was archived, redacted, and wiped from the main directory of active royals. Her images were removed from the rotating homepage slideshow. The hyperlinks once connected to her speeches, appearances, and patronages were severed. Even embedded YouTube clips were quietly delinked. Her name became a ghost in the code, present only in cached fragments and internet archives. What's more telling is how thoroughly the purge was done. Palace insiders made sure even the hidden metadata tied to her images and profile descriptions was scrubbed. This wasn't a temporary removal. It was a full disassociation, technically irreversible without creating a brand new listing. But again, the public never got an official reason. Because the palace doesn't explain actions that are beneath the surface of public protocol. They allow assumptions to swirl. They allow the media to speculate. And in doing so, they maintain plausible deniability while executing long-term damage. This calculated ambiguity gave them power. And Meghan, for all her mastery of the public stage, had no immediate counter. She couldn't accuse them outright, because they had said nothing. She couldn't sue, because no policy was broken. And she couldn't demand restoration, because no right had been technically violated. She was caught in a trap of silence. That was the strategy all along. Let the world see what happened, but never say it out loud. By refusing to label Meghan's deletion as punitive or intentional, the palace created a vacuum of motive. Into that vacuum, public opinion poured. Was it revenge? Was it justice? Was it finally the end? But the truth, as always with the crown, was more complex. It wasn't about one interview, or one podcast, or one Netflix deal. It was about control. The monarchy is built on the illusion of permanence. Its strength is in its ability to endure through scandal, silence, and time. What Meghan threatened, intentionally or not, was that illusion. She was unpredictable. She was global. She couldn't be silenced with a gentle tap on the shoulder or a disapproving glance from a senior aide. So the palace made its choice. It didn't silence her voice. It removed her echo. Not with a gavel, not with a speech, but with a deletion. A single, calculated purge that said everything without saying a word. There is a method to the monarchy's silence. It is not the silence of neglect or indecision. It is deliberate, sharpened, weaponized. And in the case of Meghan Markle's removal from the royal family's official website, the silence was perhaps the loudest message of all. The institution that has endured centuries of war, scandal, and societal upheaval did not survive by reacting emotionally or impulsively. It has lasted because it moves in the shadows. It retreats into silence when chaos erupts. That silence is not absence, it is strategy. When Meghan's profile disappeared from Royal UK, there was no press conference, no follow-up post on official social media, not even a polite, sterile update from a communications secretary. The palace didn't acknowledge the action because it didn't need to. It let the world witness the deletion in real time, allowing the press and public to do the heavy lifting of interpretation. Within the halls of Buckingham and Clarence House, this approach is known as institutional closure. It means that once the monarchy decides a course of action has been taken, there is no need for explanation or clarification. The act itself is the declaration. But what few realize is how much discussion precedes such a move. The royal family's silence is not born of neglect, it is born of calculation. Weeks before the website deletion, high-ranking officials in the palace's digital and public affairs offices were summoned for briefings. Not to debate whether to remove Meghan, but how? The phrasing, the order, the timing. Every pixel of the removal was reviewed. It was discussed behind closed doors with the same solemnity as a policy decision regarding the Commonwealth. And that is what makes the silence so effective. It is not silence from ignorance. It is silence's finality. The royal family has long understood that once it engages publicly in a dispute, it loses control of the narrative. Respond to one rumor, and suddenly 1,000 doors open. Answer a single press question, and the illusion of majesty, of aloof, timeless grace, is punctured. This is why the monarchy does not chase headlines. It lets them chase it. Consider the precedent. When Princess Diana sat down with Martin Bashir in 1995 and detonated decades of unspoken tension, the palace did not retaliate publicly. It did not issue an angry statement. It let the world digest the damage. It allowed time to become its shield. When Prince Andrew was implicated in the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, the royal response was swift but silent. He stepped back. Profiles were modified. Appearances were canceled. But the crown never opened its mouth. When Harry and Meghan launched their media offensive with Oprah, the response was a single, measured line. Recollections may vary. It was chilling in its brevity and in its finality. Now, with Meghan's removal, the silence follows the same pattern. No public debate. No press leaks. No excuses. Behind this silence is an old truth. The firm does not negotiate in public. It does not get pulled into comment wars or reactionary feuds. That is for politicians. For tabloids. Not for the crown. But the silence is not just about protecting dignity. It is also about maintaining control over memory. Once the palace issues a statement, it becomes a permanent part of public record. Words must be carefully chosen. They are archived, cited, quoted forever. But when the palace says nothing, it allows others to speak in its place. And in doing so, it absorbs all interpretations while remaining untouched. It's a masterclass in image preservation. And it works. Public debate erupted after Meghan's deletion. Was it a quiet insult? A procedural update? A buried message to Harry? The press speculated endlessly. Pundits clashed on talk shows. But no one could cite a single word from the palace itself. The crown retained its mystery, its distance, its unchallengeable authority. This silence also allowed the monarchy to signal resolve without drama. It wasn't loud. It wasn't petty. It was precise. There was no need to explain to the public why Meghan's name vanished. The monarchy exists above explanation. That is its position. That is its power. And for Meghan, this silence was suffocating. She couldn't respond to a statement because there was none. She couldn't counter a justification because none had been offered. She was fighting a ghost, an institution that refused to show its face. Inside Montecito, that silence was maddening. Meghan and her advisors crafted multiple responses, none of which landed because there was nothing to push against. A public rebuttal risked making her look paranoid or vindictive. A lawsuit was unviable, legally baseless. A media campaign couldn't land a punch on an invisible enemy. The palace, meanwhile, moved forward as if nothing had happened. No comment was ever leaked to clarify the move. No aide was quoted anonymously to soften the blow. There were no breadcrumbs left behind for interpretation. It was clinical, impersonal, and devastating. Yet, this same silence that preserved the monarchy's poise also revealed its ruthlessness. By refusing to acknowledge Meghan's removal, the palace communicated its true sentiment. She no longer mattered. She was not worth defending, nor worth attacking. She had become irrelevant to the future they were shaping. And in the world of royalty, irrelevance is exile. Silence is also protection. Within the monarchy, the fewer the words spoken, the fewer the mistakes. No matter what chaos erupts outside, the House of Windsor has learned to lock its doors and weather the storm with smiles, nods, and silence. This tactic isn't new. It's inherited. Queen Elizabeth II, the longest-reigning monarch in British history, perfected the use of silence as a survival tool. Her reign was marked by monumental change, yet she said little. When public tragedy struck, when family scandals broke, she remained an emblem of poise, refusing to be pulled into the emotional chaos. The current royal family learned from her. King Charles, for all his modernizing ambitions, still embraces that core doctrine: say less. Let others exhaust themselves in the court of public opinion. The palace will outlast the storm because it is the storm wall. Silence doesn't make the monarchy weak. It makes it inevitable. But this strategy, while effective, is not without consequence. The silence that insulated the monarchy has also left it open to reinterpretation. Without a voice to explain its actions, the institution becomes a canvas for outrage. People project meaning onto that silence, often darker than the truth. They believe the worst. They assume the cruelest motives. And when it comes to Meghan Markle, the assumptions are often brutal. The silence has allowed her detractors to claim victory, and her supporters to claim victimhood. And yet the palace, by choosing not to speak, has chosen to remain unmoved by either. It doesn't care about trending hashtags or think pieces or Twitter threads. It doesn't engage in moral debate. It doesn't bend to pressure. It has existed for over 1,000 years. It sees scandals as passing storms. That's what makes it so dangerous to those who challenge it. It doesn't rage. It erases. In Meghan's case, the erasure came in the form of quiet clicks, her biography gone, her pictures gone, her contributions ignored. And in its place? Nothing. A void. A blank space where a duchess once stood. And the palace said nothing. Because it didn't need to. It never will. Though the crown now rests on the head of King Charles III, the spiritual weight of the British monarchy still echoes with the firm, silent presence of Queen Elizabeth II. Her death marked the end of an era, but not the end of her influence. Within palace walls, among senior courtiers, And even in the minds of her children and grandchildren, her legacy remains more than ceremonial. It is institutional code. It governs tone. It informs action. It guides restraint. And in the matter of Meghan Markle's sudden erasure from the royal website, there is no doubt Elizabeth's legacy cast a long and deliberate shadow. No official statement mentioned her name in the update. She is no longer here to comment, correct, or intervene. But the decision to delete Meghan's digital presence without fanfare, bitterness, or noise was quintessentially Elizabethan. This was not an act of vengeance. It was continuity. A quiet, firm assertion that the monarchy remembers who belongs and who does not. To understand the full picture, one must return to the Queen's final years. Elizabeth II was in her 90s when Harry and Meghan's public split from the royal family escalated into an international crisis. The Oprah interview, aired in 2021, hit Buckingham Palace like a tsunami. Accusations of racism, neglect, emotional trauma, and institutional cruelty stained the monarchy's global reputation, and the Queen, though ailing, faced it with the composure only she could command. She did not call a press conference. She did not fire off a rebuttal. She released a single statement, barely a paragraph long. The issues raised, particularly that of race, are concerning. While some recollections may vary, they are taken very seriously and will be addressed by the family privately. That sentence, "some recollections may vary," became the most quoted phrase of the year in royal circles. Not because it was flashy or accusatory, but because it encapsulated her entire philosophy. Defend the institution. Do not be dragged into spectacle. Let the crown speak through restraint. Elizabeth had spent a lifetime enduring scandals. From her uncle's abdication to the messy divorces of her children, she had watched the monarchy wobble under intense public scrutiny. She survived not by matching the volume of critics, but by lowering hers. While the world screamed, the Queen endured. It was this endurance, not action, that restored trust again and again. Privately, sources suggest that she was deeply hurt by Meghan and Harry's departure. Not because she didn't understand their pain, but because she believed in duty before comfort, in service before platform, in family, even when fractured. There are reports, unconfirmed but persistent, that Elizabeth tried to reach Meghan several times in the aftermath of the Oprah interview, that she sent handwritten notes, that she offered private invitations to Windsor quiet conversations behind closed doors, far from cameras. Meghan declined. Whether out of fear, defiance, or self-protection, she refused the Queen's olive branch. And it stung. The Queen had embraced Meghan in the beginning. She broke protocol by allowing her to accompany her on solo royal engagements, a gesture not granted to many new royals, especially not so early. She was said to be fond of Meghan's warmth, her energy, her potential to modernize the crown's image. But something fractured. Not all at once. Not in one moment. But slowly, relentlessly. Bit by bit, until the chasm was too wide. When Harry and Meghan announced their decision to step back from royal duties in 2020, the Queen's reaction was measured but unmistakably disappointed. She issued a statement acknowledging their intention, wishing them well, but reiterating one phrase that would later echo in the halls of royal decision-making: "You cannot be half in and half out." That phrase would become the unofficial rule for all subsequent royal behavior. You cannot represent the crown while profiting from the illusion of its association. You cannot criticize the institution while still expecting a space within it. You cannot be royal when it suits your narrative and disown it when it does not. This belief didn't die with the Queen. It hardened. King Charles and Prince William were both shaped by that philosophy. While Charles may have had moments of personal sympathy for Harry and Meghan's emotional difficulties, he never abandoned the core teachings of his mother. William, more austere and pragmatic, absorbed the lessons with even greater fervor. To them, Meghan's profile remaining on the royal website after years of open criticism and detachment was not just an oversight, it was an insult to the Queen's legacy. And so, the act of removal was not revenge. It was adherence. A final enforcement of Elizabeth's clearest rule: the crown must never be diluted. Titles may remain for political or legal reasons, but recognition? That is earned, and it is sacred. Many inside the palace viewed the deletion as a form of quiet loyalty to the late monarch, a spiritual fulfillment of her unfinished decisions. She had passed before making any public moves against Meghan, perhaps holding out hope for reconciliation. But her successors felt no such obligation to wait. They acted as they believed she would have, gently, firmly, without drama. And in that choice, They mirrored her most powerful trait, making monumental decisions look like ordinary procedure. The Queen knew that time erodes memory, that controversy fades, that silence, when wielded correctly, can outlast any headline. Her